Hi, this is Marc Elias from Democracy Docket. It is Sunday, June 15th, and this is my weekly update. Well, I'll tell you, last week was one of the darkest ones we have had since Donald Trump took office. In California, we not only saw the National Guard federalized, we not only saw Marines deployed, but we saw the President of the United States threaten the governor with arrest for the crime of having won an election and governed the state in a way that Donald Trump didn't like. When asked about this, the Speaker of the House didn't distance himself. He doubled down and said he wasn't going to opine on whether or not Gavin Newsom should be arrested, but that he thought he should be subjected to vigilante justice in the form of tar and feathering.
That's not my lane. I'm not going to give you legal analysis on whether Gavin Newsom should be arrested, but he ought to be tarred and feathered. I'll say that.
Then, as the week went along, we saw Senator Alex Padilla from California manhandled, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed simply for showing up at a press conference with Kristi Noem and trying to ask a question. Once again, Republicans did not recoil from this. They embraced this. The Speaker, once again, leading the way, saying that Senator Padilla should be subject to formal censure rather than owed an apology. There was some good news, though, during the week. The Georgia State Supreme Court struck down 4 anti-voting election subversion rules that had been approved by that state's election board shortly before the 2024 election. Remember, these are the Republican members of the board that Donald Trump called out by name during a campaign rally shortly before the 2024 election. They did his bidding. But I'll tell you, the Georgia Supreme Court was having none of it. In a unanimous ruling, the conservative state Supreme Court of Georgia struck down those 4 rules, saying they violated the law and the state's constitution. In other good news, a federal judge in Boston struck down Trump's anti-voting executive order. Now, this was a lawsuit brought by 19 Democratic-led state attorney generals challenging critical provisions of that anti-voting executive order, including the documentary proof of citizenship requirement that you have heard me and Paige Moskowitz talk about ad nauseum in various videos. We'll put a link to a few of those videos in the description below if you want to get more caught up on that, as well as the judge blocked an effort to eliminate mail-in ballot receipt grace periods. Also something that Paige and I have done a lot of videos on, and Democracy Docket has written about on their website. This is actually the second court to issue an injunction against this executive order. You may recall a few weeks ago, the Democratic Party brought a similar lawsuit, striking down parts of this executive order, and the Department of Justice said it would not appeal that preliminary injunction. However, also this week, the Republican National Committee intervened in that case, or at least parts of that case, and so we all need to keep our eyes on this case out of Boston. Good ruling there. The case out of D.C., where we had a good ruling, because I have a feeling the Republican Party is not done with these issues yet. And this is as good a time as any to make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket, to make sure you are kept up to date in everything the RNC and Donald Trump is up to, as well as the good news that is happening in courts around the country. The link is above and in the description below. Finally, on Friday, we got really good news out of the state of Maine, where a state court upheld ballot language that accurately describes the photo ID anti-voting provision that conservative groups have put on the ballot there. They wanted a whitewashed version to go before voters so that they could sneak this anti-voting provision in through popular vote. But kudos to Maine Secretary of State Shanna Bellows for accurately describing this initiative in the way in which she did. And it is good to see that the courts have upheld that. Now, let's pivot to the week in front of us, because it is going to be a very, very heavy week in court next week for democracy. Wednesday, an opinion day in the U.S. Supreme Court. We're down to the final couple of weeks here before the Supreme Court term ends, and this is the time of year in which we get the biggest, most controversial, most hotly contested judicial opinions. You know, in the last couple of weeks, as we've been watching, it's been a whole lot of 9-0 decisions, a whole lot of 8-1 decisions. The Supreme Court clearly trying to clear out the parts of its docket that are less controversial, where the justices by and large agree. We are getting into these final 2 weeks where it is really going to be the stuff that comes out 6-3, 5-4, and where, you know, the really important decisions for the future get made. So Wednesday is our next opinion day. We're waiting on the big redistricting case out of Louisiana. This is an effort by white voters in Louisiana to essentially undo or to severely weaken the Voting Rights Act by striking down a map that was drawn by the state of Louisiana in compliance with a court order that created a second majority Black opportunity district. And so we will see what happens here every time there is a redistricting or voting rights case on the Supreme Court docket that has to be decided. My heart actually starts beating faster and I start panicking a little bit, but I will stay calm. You need to stay calm, and you need to make sure that you are following Democracy Docket, because they will have the most immediate and thorough analysis of what happens in this critical case out of Louisiana. Now, we're also waiting on some other really important decisions, including the one about whether federal district courts can issue nationwide injunctions. This will be a very, very important case for democracy, because right now Donald Trump is being blocked in all these courtrooms by judges who are issuing injunctions, not just in their jurisdiction, but on a nationwide basis. And his Justice Department is arguing against that, which, depending on how the Supreme Court rules and what the nuance is here, could have devastating consequences for the ability of people to get justice in this country through federal court injunctions. We'll wait and see what that is. Again, Democracy Docket will have full coverage, but there are also other important cases, like we're waiting on a decision on the government's request to continue mass federal layoffs. So make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're following Democracy Docket. Now, it's not just the Supreme Court, though, that we have to watch in the week ahead. On Monday, a trial begins in North Carolina in federal court challenging that state's congressional map. You will remember that this is one of the worst gerrymanders in the country that the Republican legislature did there. Now, this is not a case challenging the gerrymander as a political gerrymander. Instead, the plaintiffs in that case argue that the current map intentionally discriminates against Black and Latino voters under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and under the 14th and 15th Amendment. This is a big case in both the development of the law, but also if you are closely watching the midterm elections, because this state is so gerrymandered in favor of Republicans. If, in fact, a federal court finds that the legislature in drawing this map discriminated against minority voters, it would cause a redraw and potentially change the dynamics of that map. On Tuesday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, this is the circuit that covers California, will hold a hearing on the government's request to block the district court's decision that had prevented or had undone Donald Trump's federalizing of the California National Guard. You'll recall, as I mentioned, Donald Trump federalized the California National Guard in what is nothing other than a sheer power play, an example of his effort to be a dictator, to be a despot, to be an authoritarian, pick your word. Anyway, federal judge said, nope, you can't take over the California National Guard under the circumstances that have been presented. The Department of Justice went running to the Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit will hold an emergency or a very fast hearing on that in that case on Tuesday. We all got to pay attention to that. Again, best way for you to do it, subscribe to Democracy Docket. On Wednesday in Oregon, there'll be a hearing in a right-wing group's lawsuit challenging Oregon's voter roll maintenance procedures. I mean, for fuck's sake. I mean, it is crazy how many lawsuits Republicans and conservative allies of theirs are bringing to try to kick people off the rolls. I mean, Paige and I do a lot of videos on this, and you can go see in our library a lot of videos on this. We could do twice or three times the number of videos. I mean, like every week, Paige and I sit down and we're like, should we do another video in another state where another conservative group or Republicans are trying to find another excuse to kick people off the rolls, either by forcing voter purges or allow mass challenges or, you know, some other mechanism. Well, on Wednesday, we will see that. The reason why I highlight this one is because the Department of Justice, the entity that is supposed to be protecting voting rights, not anymore. not under Donald Trump, not under Pam Bondi. It recently submitted a brief supporting the right-wing challenge. So pay attention to this on Wednesday. Let us hope that the groups that are undermining voting rights are handed another loss and a big black eye to the Department of Justice. So that's what we got. That just happened. That's what we got in the week ahead. Look, do me a favor. Click on the button right in front of you that says subscribe. Become a subscriber to this YouTube channel so that you will be kept up to date whenever there is breaking news, whenever there are interesting interviews, whenever there are updates on what is happening to democracy in court. You will be sure to get it here. And also make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket's newsletters. There are free options. There are paid premium options. They are all great. The link to that is above and in the description below. I'll see you next time.